So we're on the bottom of some of these, last line, and right in the middle of the line, Ikut Amri, Aleph Dalet. Okay, now we were discussing yesterday the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. It says there's a difference between when a Jewish court convicts somebody and a non-Jewish court convicts someone. According to Rabbi Yosef, when a Jewish court convicts, we can still presume the convict is still alive. He won't be immediately executed. Whereas a non-Jewish court, we do not presume this to be the case. We presume that he was executed fairly quickly. And according to the final version of the Gemara, this is true if we know that he was if we know that he was if he was convicted. However, if the executioner tells us that he was killed, the executioner just thinks that he has another person to kill because the guy's on trial. Doesn't yet mean he was convicted, and therefore it does not mean he's dead. But if the executioner says he was convicted, then we can presume he's going to die fairly quickly. He'll be executed fairly quickly. In the next version of the Gemara, which is what we're about to see, which is sort of an inverse repetition of yesterday, Rabbi Yosef changes his mind. Or there's another version about what Rabbi Yosef said. Amar Rav Yosef says, Lo shanu ela bezin shel avdei chavim. It is true that once somebody is convicted by a non-Jewish court, we give him the severity of both being alive and dead. Let me rephrase that. When somebody is convicted by a court, we treat him with the severity of being both alive and dead, which means that if his wife is if a Yisraelis is married to a Kohen, she cannot eat truma because maybe he died, and if she herself is a Kohenes married to a Yisrael, we presume maybe he's still alive, and therefore she cannot eat truma either. Obviously, she doesn't have kids. This is true only of a non-Jewish court. Avol bezin shel Yisrael, but in terms of a Jewish court, even enough when a Jewish court convicts somebody of a capital crime, we presume that he was summarily executed immediately. It's the opposite. So yesterday I was telling you that a Jewish court they look to find they look to redeem their conviction and overturn it, and a non-Jewish court executes relatively quickly after conviction. Today we're saying the opposite. A Jewish court who convicts, the fellow is summarily executed. A non-Jewish court that convicts, things could take a while until he's actually executed. Yeah, it sounds a lot like the world that we live in. So Abaye says to him, hold on a second. You're telling me that a Jewish court executes relatively quickly following conviction. Maybe the Jewish court will find a merit. So the Gemara says, "Ki chazal eschusa mikami delig mardina." Basar gmardina sule chazal eschusa. They typically will find a redeeming factor only before they convicted him. Once they convict him, they're not continuously searching for a redemptive argument. Let's bring a brisa to support the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. If two witnesses say that somebody was previously convicted of a capital crime, then if the court is going to accept their witness testimony, then the court will execute the convict. And presumably it does so immediately without considering the fact that maybe they found a redeeming feature and overturned the conviction. So the Gemara says, it could be that somebody who's an escapee is a different status. In other words, we don't, like we explained yesterday, we are not going to look when someone escapes, we give him the letter of the law, and that means execution. Toshma, another proof. Shomimi bezin shel Yisrael. You hear it from a Jewish court. Ish plani nerag. They hear from a Jewish court that somebody died, somebody was executed. Yisu es ishtay. One is allowed to marry his wife. Mi kuman trisen shel avigachavim, from a non-Jewish executioner. Ish pleni meis, ish pleni nereg. This person died or he was executed. Al yasiu es ishtay. You should not marry his wife. My meis and my nereg. What does meis and nereg mean? Elam, if it means meis mamish, he actually died. V'nereg, he was executed mamish. The kavasaga be'evgachavim my al yasiu es ishtay. If a non-Jewish executioner testifies that he saw a person die or executed him himself, why can't you remarry his wife? Anyone who any non-Jew who speaks casually about an event is believed with regard to being able to allow a woman to remarry. Elalav must be meis yotzalamos. Meis is somebody who's going out to die. V'nerag yotzalahara, someone's going to be going out to be executed. Uktani, and it says, the Jewish court, one can marry his wife. Why is this? Must be because the Jewish court executes fairly quickly, and a non-Jewish court does not. And therefore, when someone's in other words, over here, the Bryce is being understood as referring to conviction, and it supports the opinion of the second version of Rabbi Yosef, that a Jewish court executes following conviction, a non-Jewish court does not. So the 1 second. We're on Chavtes and Aleph. Just give me a moment. 2 lines above the Mishnah.
What, 29?
29a, and 2 lines above the Mishnah. So the Gemara resolves that Hani Mili b'milsa l'shricha, b'milsa l'shaychi b'avdi l'hasuga shekrayos. The Gemara is saying that no, it could be. 1 second. It could be the reason why they're not believed is not because they don't execute quickly. In other words, it could be that Rabbi Yosef is incorrect. A non-Jewish court also executes fairly quickly. The reason why they're not believed is because an executioner is not believed in his own craft. We presume that he sort of exaggerates how many people he actually kills. And therefore, it's not reliable enough to allow a woman to remarry. Okay, now we get to the new Mishnah. Chavtes and Aleph. Get together?
Utterly.
Perfect. Jared?
Yes.
Okay. Very interesting discussion. Is yeshivas, they spend a lot of time in one of these gemaras. Very interesting idea. So let's begin. Hamevi geb Eretz Yisrael, somebody who brings a divorce inside of Israel. What's notable about bringing a divorce inside of Israel? You do not need to say b'fanei nechtav. Not necessary. And what happened? So he's a messenger. And then he fell ill. He cannot carry on his duty as a messenger. He can he can appoint a new messenger and send the divorce with a new messenger. Okay. Next scenario. The next scenario is not only was he a messenger to send a divorce, he was also a messenger of him. The husband says to him, "Totally hemeno chayfetz play." You know, when we were married, I had this expensive watch. Go pick up my Rolex from her as well. In other words, give her a divorce and pick up my Rolex. He should not ask somebody else to perform the service of being a messenger. The presumption here is that a person does not want his vessels, his stuff, to be in somebody else's hands. In other words, he trusts the first guy, but doesn't trust the second guy, or he doesn't even know who the second guy is in this case. And therefore, the presumption here is he probably wouldn't want the second guy carrying his Rolex. Omer of Kahana. Rav Kahana says, Cholatanan. It says he got sick. So the Gemara says, obviously, Pshita, seems to be pretty obvious. Cholak that's exactly what it says in the Mishnah. I would have thought, even if he was not ill, this that the Mishnah says he was ill, In other words, I would think that maybe a messenger is allowed to appoint another messenger even without the first messenger becoming ill and being unable to fulfill his duties. So therefore, if Kahana says, no, it's only if he becomes ill, that's where he has the permission to appoint a second messenger. Otherwise, he does not have permission. Okay. The ideas here, why this is the case that he could or can't, will become more clear as we move on. So the Gemara says, hey, Chidami, what is exactly going on in this Mishnah? In other words, what the Gemara is really asking here is that there's another brisa that gives very specific parameters, and our Mishnah gives a very general parameter. So what is going on in our Mishnah? Is our Mishnah disagreeing with the brisa or not? So what's the Gemara phrases it as follows: hey, Chidami. What's the scenario in the Mishnah? In other words, what was the exact terminology that the husband said to the messenger, to the shliach? Ida Amar Leif, he said to him, Hailach, go. In other words, he made no mention of the individual personally. He said, take the divorce and bring it to my wife. He made no mention of him personally. Even if he did not fall ill, he should be allowed to appoint another messenger. If he said to him, I want you to be the messenger, so even if he became ill, because he specified he wants the messenger to be specifically the person who he appointed, then even if he becomes ill, he can't appoint a new messenger. And if it's according to the opinion of Rav Shimon Gamliel, which we'll explain in a moment, then even if he becomes ill, it should also make no difference. The Tanya we learned, because it's a brisa. If he tells a messenger, bring this divorce to my wife, the messenger has permission to appoint a second messenger. If he says to him, you should bring this divorce to my wife, he should not send this divorce through somebody else. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, regardless, in either scenario, a messenger should not be making another messenger. Okay, what's going on here? So it's very simple. According to this brisa, the basic question is, what does the husband want? To be able to give a divorce on behalf of the husband, you must be an appointed shliach. If you weren't an appointed shliach, you can't gift it on his behalf. You have to serve as a stand-in for a requirement of a nasan to actually transact the divorce, to give it. And that stand-in can only be created through shlichus, through the idea that you can serve as somebody else's messenger. So now, if you're included in the statement of what the husband appointed, then that's acceptable. And if not, it's unacceptable, and the divorce is not valid, because the messenger or the so-called messenger is not actually a messenger. He's not a stand-in for the husband. He has no right to provide a divorce on behalf of. So the Bryce explains very simply: if the guy made a generic "give the divorce to my wife," then he can appoint a second messenger. If he says "I want you," he cannot. And according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, in either case, we presume the husband does not intend for the messenger to hand over his responsibility to a second messenger. So Gemara says, there's three possibilities. The first resolution is, of course, we were talking about where he made a generic statement, because if he did not make a generic statement, you would not have permission to hand it over. And even when he made a generic statement, the rabbis insisted that only in a scenario where he's unable to fulfill his duties, that's when he's able to hand over being a messenger, pass the baton. But if he did not say hailach, he cannot pass the baton. Another answer is atarlach. It's talking about where he specified you bring the divorce. And even though regularly we would say that even though regularly we would say that if somebody specifically says you bring the divorce, he does not want a second messenger, but but the presumptive understanding is where the messenger falls ill and cannot complete his work, presumably the husband wants his wife to still get a divorce and therefore allows the messenger to create a second messenger. The Bayasema, and a third possibility, it's the opinion of Rav Shimon Gamliel, the Chala Shiny. And if he becomes ill, that's a different category. In other words, Rav Shimon Gamliel says typically a messenger may not hand over his job as his responsibility, except where he becomes ill, then we presume the husband would have allowed it. Tanan, we learned Hamevi get in the Mishnah. Hamevi get Eretz Yisrael v'chola harei ze mishalcha b'yad acher. Our Mishnah says you can appoint a second messenger if you become ill. V'raminu. Here's the question. Okay, now let's just make a point here. What's the scenario in our Mishnah? Very simple. There is a divorce that's already written, and he tells the messenger, "You go serve to carry the divorce." Listen closely to the brisa. Amar l'shnayim tnu get le'ishli. He tells two people, "Give a divorce to my wife." In this case, the divorce has not been written yet. Ayla shloisha, or to three people, kisvu get utnu le'ishli. Write a divorce and give it to my wife. Harei elu yichtavu v'yitnu. They should write it and they should give the divorce. Inu specifically these people, avol shliach loy. Meaning, if somebody tells two people, give a divorce to my wife, and he doesn't hand them anything, he just tells them, give a divorce to his wife. So what do they need to do? They need to write the divorce themselves. Why doesn't he want to hire somebody to write the divorce? Well, because he's divorcing his wife, and he doesn't want anyone to know he's divorcing his wife. He's embarrassed of it, so he doesn't want anyone else writing it. And that's why he tells two people, you yourselves go ahead and do it. The same thing is true with three people. 1 second. Okay. Now, if he tells two people, give it, what he means to say is you should write it and you should give it. Or if he tells three people, write it and give it, then they themselves have to write it. If he tells three people to give a divorce, then what he means to do is to make them into a court, because they're three people, and therefore then they're allowed to get somebody else to write it. But if he tells them specifically write it, he tells three people write it and give it, then they themselves must write it. Presumably what's going on here? When the Gemara at least now presumes that if the husband says to somebody to give a divorce or to write a divorce and give it, he means specifically the person who he told, and they have no right to farm out the responsibility of writing it to outsource it out to a scribe. They themselves, yes, avol shliach loy. So how could our Mishnah say that a shliach is able to hand over his responsibilities, and the new messenger still maintains the power of attorney from the husband? But don't we see clearly from this brisa that if the husband appoints somebody as a messenger, the messenger does not have the ability to outsource his responsibility? So Abaye explains the following resolution. What's the reason? Why is the husband doing this? Because he doesn't want to be embarrassed. He doesn't want the scribe to know that he wants to divorce his wife. But once the divorce is already written, then the husband presumably doesn't care if it's handed over to another messenger, en route to his wife. And in other words, what Abaye is claiming here is that it's a unique set of laws that pertains to writing divorce, and any other set of laws does not have this category, and therefore a messenger could actually appoint another messenger. Rava says, Mishum demili nenu, umili lo'mimser l'shliach. So very interesting. What does this mean? Because in our scenario, what did he tell them? What did he tell the messenger? He said, give the documents. He told them to perform an action. Whereas in the scenario of the two people that he told him to divorce his wife and did not provide them with the divorce, what he actually told them was, he just told them words. He gave them the power of attorney, but did not associate it directly with an action. Because they first needed to write the document, and then they were able to give it. And according to this version of events, according to Rava, because it's milin, it's just words. In other words, the divorce itself hasn't been written. It isn't in the power of the shliach to hand over his responsibility. My benayu, what's the difference? Shliach matana. The guy asks his friend give it a gift. He tells his friend, "You write the gift and you give it." According to Rava, this is mili. This is this type of messenger. The only power of attorney given to him is sort of an abstract, a command to write something and then give it, and therefore he cannot outsource the responsibility of writing the document. However, according to Abai, that the reason here is mishum bezoyin the baal, because of the embarrassment of the husband. There's no husband here. There's no embarrassment. This is a gift, and therefore the messengers could outsource the writing of the gift. Rav says that a matana is not like a divorce, because according to Rav, a gift is not like a divorce, and therefore, with regard to a gift, one is able to allow the messengers who are told to write the gift document are able to outsource the writing of the document to a scribe. Shmuel says matana harei get, it's the same thing. Shmuel here is like the opinion of like Rava, because Abai of Rava the halacha is like Rava, and Rav and Shmuel the halacha is like Shmuel with regard to financial law. Therefore, you can imagine very clearly the halacha is certainly like Shmuel and Rava. Should be a very classical example of this. And the idea here is mili lemimser l'shliach, that if a messenger is carrying just a power of attorney without a specific command and a document, then the laws of being a messenger are different, and therefore he cannot outsource the responsibility of being a messenger. The idea, according to Rashi, is that the question sort of is how powerful is your shlichus? How strong is your connection between you as a messenger to the husband? The stronger that relationship is, because of the type of messenger you were appointed, the more power you have to hand it over to somebody else. And therefore, when you have a document that's directly connected to the husband, so therefore you're a much stronger messenger, and therefore you're able to hand over that responsibility to somebody else. Whereas when you just have, you're told to write a document, you're a much weaker messenger, and therefore you're unable to hand it over. While you yourself could serve as a messenger, you're not sufficiently in place of the husband to be able to hand it over to somebody else. If he says, collect for me this valuable object, so then the messenger is not allowed to appoint a second messenger. Omer Shlakish says, Kan Shana Rebbe, here is a source for the following idea. Ein hashoyel rishoy lahashal. A borrower may not lend out his borrowed object. The ein hasaycher rishoy lahasker. A renter cannot outsource, he can't sublet his own rental. Because presumably the owner trusts only the first fellow, not the second. So Rish Lakish basically saying this is the idea of the Mishnah. Rabbi is telling me that it's not a healthy idea. This is obvious. Everybody knows this. But sometimes it could be worse, and it won't even be a valid divorce. And the Gemara will explain this. It's as if he says to him, to the messenger, Al Tagarsha, do not divorce her, Ela Bebayis, in a house. In other words, he's making a condition of the divorce. The divorce should only be valid if it's given in a house. The Gersha Baliyah, he gave her the divorce in an attic. Al Tagarsha El Bimin, give her the divorce with the right hand. The Gersha Basmali, divorce with the left hand. Okay. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying there's potential here for the divorce to be invalid. The Gemara explains. To kula alma hechad enough for la apei v'yavel lichayfetz v'hadar shakla minay gita. Kula alma pliga de gita. In a scenario where he appointed another shliach anyway, and she hands over the Rolex, the item he desires, and then she gets her divorce. Everyone agrees that the divorce is valid. Keep pligi. What's the debate? Amrle, where the husband says to the messenger, we're on top now of Testament base. Kol minei chayfetz v'hadar havla gita. First collect the item, then give her the divorce. V'azal iu and the shliach, whether it's the first or the second shliach, v'yavla gita v'hadar shakal minei. He gave her the divorce and then collected the Rolex. Rabbi Yochanan paisal bay v'kol shkem b'shluchai. Rabbi Yochanan says it's invalid with the first messenger, and certainly it's not valid with the second messenger. Rish Lakish says that he didn't mean to be specific, that it could only be a scenario where first he collects the Rolex, then he gives divorce. Rish Lakish holds he wasn't being that specific, and therefore, according to Rish Lakish, give me a second here. Okay, so according to Rish Lakish, it doesn't make a difference whether it's the first or the second shliach. They're both acceptable. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it does make a difference. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we one second. Okay, as far therefore, Rabbi Yochanan is being much stricter in understanding the Mishnah, and Rish Lakish a lot less strict. Rish Lakish is saying that typically speaking, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be handing over your responsibilities. But if you did, it's going to be kosher. And Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, don't do it. We're not going to allow you to do it, period. And the reason for that is because according to Rabbi Yochanan, the exact wording of the husband's statement matters significantly, and therefore we're concerned that the first shliach might confuse what the husband actually said when he repeats it over to the second shliach. Okay, we're at the Mishnah on Chavtes Amud Beis. Hamevi get Medina Siyam, somebody who brings the divorce outside of Israel, and then he becomes ill. So Isa Shliach Bebesdin, he appoints a messenger in a court. And he sends it through the second messenger. And he says in front of the court, the second messenger is not a messenger of, he's not required to say b'fanei nachtav, because b'fanei nachtav was already said in court. And therefore he says, I am a messenger of the court. The rabbi said to Avimi, they asked Rabavu the following question: Shliach the shliach mashvi shliach olai. Could the second shliach make a third shliach or not? He says it's not a question. If you read the Mishnah closely, the Mishnah says he makes a shliach in Bezdin, in court. And then then the Mishnah concludes the last shliach does not need to say b'fanei nachtav. He says shliach b'asnani. What does it mean the last shliach? He's the second shliach. Must be that the second shliach is actually able to make a third and fourth shliach. And that's when the Mishnah says the last shliach, it says he's a shliach of Bezdin, of the court. What is the question? In other words, every time this messenger makes a new messenger, does it need to be done in court or outside court? Amarlei Savim responds, this is neither a question. If he says he's a shliach of the court, it must be that each one was every subsequent messenger was appointed in court. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Masni Hachi. Rav Nachman Yitzchak had a slightly different version of this Gemara. The rabbi said to Avimi, the son of Rabavu, they asked Rabavu the following question: Shliach the shliach, the third messenger. does he need to be appointed in court or outside court? Amar lahu, and again, what exactly is the question here? The question here is, because the final messenger is saying he's a shliach of the court, why does he need to say he's a shliach of the court? Because b'fanei nechtam was already said. So does that need to be done in court or not? Amar lahusa, Rabbi Dovid responded to them, why are you asking to me if it needs to be done in court? First ask me, could he even appoint a third messenger? They said that the student said back to him, that we don't have a question. It's not a question to us whether the second messenger can make a third and a fourth messenger, make a third and the third, a fourth and the fourth and fifth, etc. Because that's clear in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says the last shliach says, I'm a shliach of the courts. So clearly they could each make multiple messengers, meaning each one can make someone to replace them. What was the question that I had? Does it need to be in court or not in court? He said this isn't either a question. Because the final messenger says he's a messenger of the court, it must be that he was appointed in court. Amar Rabba says, Shliach be'eretz Yisrael, oisa kama shluchim. A messenger in Israel can make many different messengers. Okay, now again, a messenger in Israel does not need to say b'fanei nechtav, therefore does not need to be a messenger of the court. And obviously the first can make a second, the second a third, the third a fourth, etc. Okay. Rashi says, very interesting, in Meis Rishon Batlu Kulam. What happens if the first messenger dies? They're all invalid. Because each one has the power of attorney of the previous one. Rashi, so the son of Rav Ashi says, this time my father said, if the guy dies, then nobody else can make a messenger. He said it when he was a child, when he was younger. It was a mistake. He later changed his mind. Our main concern is whether or not the husband dies. If the husband dies, he can't give a divorce. If the husband's not dead, if the husband is alive, then they have the power of attorney of the original husband. And therefore they're not actually chaining their power of attorney from the previous messenger. It all goes back to the husband, and therefore, even if one of the messengers dies, it would still be valid. Okay, and Gemara has a few interesting stories. A man was sending a divorce to his wife. I don't know what your wife looks like or where she is. He says to him, go give it to Abba, the son of Menyumi. He knows her. And he will give the divorce to her. He went to the town. He could not find Abba bar Menyumi. So he found Rabbi Dovid Yehudah bar Papa, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka. So he finds Rabbi Dovid, Rabbi Chanina, and Rabbi Yitzchak, a court. Yosef, Rav Safra Gabayo, and Rav Safra sitting and observing them. They said to him, Moser Miloch Kamein, Kamedidon. So they said to him, he said, okay, you can't find Abba bar Menyumi. Give us the divorce, and we'll give it to Abba bar Menyumi when we find him. When he comes around, we will give him the divorce. Law, and he will go ahead and give it to her, to the man's wife. Rav Safra says that this is not going to work. How could he give over his responsibility to the court? He's not a messenger to actually divorce the woman. He merely serves as an agent to carry over the documents. And how do you know that agency can be transferred to the responsibility of the courts? I understand that you can transfer the responsibility of giving the divorce, but this messenger isn't the messenger to give the divorce. It's Abba bar Menyumi who's the messenger. Gemara says, the three rabbis in the court, they were embarrassed. Rava says, Rav Safra cut the legs of three rabbis that had smicha. This is the real smicha, which is a little bit different than what we have today. Rav Ashi says, hold on, but how did he cut off their feet? He never said that Abba bar Menyumi should be the one. He said, if you can't find it, then you'll give it to Abba Yumi. But certainly he appointed this messenger as a messenger to provide the divorce. He said Abba Yumi is a contact person. He never stated that it must be Abba Yumi who gives the divorce. And therefore, indeed, they could have given the document to the members of the court. Eked Amri, there's another version of the story, which is exactly the opposite. Rava says, Rav Safra cut the feet of three rabbis, but he was wrong. Rav Safra was incorrect, because the truth of the matter is that the rabbis were right that divorce was able to be handed over to this rabbinic court. Rav Ashi says, "My tuusa, what was the mistake? Micah Amrle, Abmar Menyumi V'le'at." I'm sorry, Micah Amrle. In other words, my tuusa. What's the mistake? The mistake you're going to argue is that the rabbis thought there was a shliach shlein nitin l'gerushin. He was never appointed to serve as a messenger to divorce, and obviously you're saying that was a mistake because clearly he never limited the divorce to Abba Bar Menyumi. So therefore, Abaye responds by saying that. I'm sorry, Rav Ashi responds by saying no. He did say what he meant to say was Abba Bar Menyumi should be the one to give a divorce and not you, and therefore the rabbis were incorrect in requesting the divorce be handed over. Okay, another similar story. Somebody sent to divorce his wife. You should not divorce her until 30 days. Okay, it's an interesting question here. Now, the question is he a shliach shlein nitin l'gerushin or not? Is he a shliach to give a divorce or not? He can only give a divorce after 30 days. Within 30 days, he had an einus, he had an unusual event, and he could not complete his duties, his responsibility. Also, like Rava. He came in front of Rava. The Mishnah says somebody who falls ill is able to hand over his responsibilities. So you too can hand over your responsibilities. So he says to him, appoint me the messenger, and I'll give it. After 30 days, I'll appoint a messenger who will divorce the man's wife. So the rabbis who were sitting there, they said to Rava, hold on a second. This messenger is not a messenger who can serve as an emissary to divorce, because he was never appointed to divorce. Why not? Because the husband said, you need to wait 30 days. So until 30 days, he can't hand over his responsibility, because he's not responsible to divorce the guy's wife until 30 days later. Amar Lei, so Rav says no. Even though since after 30 days he's able to divorce her, so therefore even before 30 days he's considered a shliach shlein nitin l'gerushin. He is a messenger who's able to divorce. He just has a time restriction on him. It doesn't fundamentally change the type of emissary that he was appointed to, the type of responsibility he was given. And therefore, because he was responsible to divorce, he could hand it over. The Gemara has a side problem. Hold on a second. The rabbis came back and said, let's be concerned that maybe the husband was intimate with his wife during that period. In other words, during that 30-day period. Mila Tanan, don't we have a mission that says as follows? Someone's going on a business trip. He says, I'm divorcing you today if I don't come back within 12 months. And then he dies, the divorce is kosher. And the rabbis asked, maybe he came back and was intimate with her after the divorce, which invalidates the document. And Rabbi Rav Huna answered this mission. In the name of Abba Morim, in the name of Rav. He specifically appointed, when he gave over the divorce, he said, I should not be believed to claim at any later point that I came back in the middle and was intimate with my wife. And therefore, there's no concern that he came back. Now, that is true when he went on a business trip. So he's in a faraway place and he's trusting somebody else to testify as to whether or not he came back during the 12-month periods. But over here, he was in town. He lived in the area. So how do we know? Maybe he came back in the middle. Maybe he was together with his wife. So Gemara says, Rava was embarrassed. Rava had no response because clearly they got Rava. Rava, they got him. Rava should not have been lenient and allow the divorce to proceed because we have a concern. Maybe he came back within 30 days. Turns out they never got married. There's a status in Arusa. So when Rava says that, so Rava says, "Oh, so I was actually right." Why? If they said that there's a concern, maybe they were intimate, that concern is only true of an Asua. You think they would say that by an Arusa? They never consummated the relationship. There's no reason to suspect that he would come back in middle and be intimate with her. And therefore, Rava was saying his halachic ruling was indeed justified. Okay. We begin Amar Rava tomorrow.